we've had a long and wonderful career together, and it's taken everything that I teach began with meeting Norm and merging it with my own background in theology, but it all the day that I'm not sure that I would have pursued anything in medical intuition, certainly not as courageously, if I had not met Norm Shealy. So some people I think you are destined to meet in your life. And for me, Norm is one of my destined people, and certainly one of the people I love the most.
At any rate, when I was in medical school, I used to ask questions that nobody wanted me to ask. And as I got into my neurosurgical residency, which was at Harvard, I couldn't decide whether the patients or the surgeons were crazier because they were cutting the spinal cord or taking out essentially the frontal lobes for people with chronic pain. And I thought that was pretty barbarian, to say the least. And so I got interested in how can we manage pain without destroying the nervous system. So I spent 3 years working in physiology of pain, and I suddenly had an idea that if we stimulated electrically the back part of the spinal cord, it would relieve pain. That was 1965. And I proved it. And when I presented that to the Congress of Neurological Surgeons, it was almost a battle on the floor. People were jumping up on a podium a little higher than this and grabbing the microphone out of my hand and shouting and screaming. And we almost had a fight on the floor about whether or not you could even just study pain in animals. Well, when I began doing it in people, in 1967, suddenly every neurosurgeon in the world wanted to do the procedure. And I thought we needed to be a little more cautious in that and do 500 people and follow it for 5 years. But greed got in the way, and the big organizations that make such things decided to sell them prematurely. And I'm trying to decide, how do you decide who is a candidate for this? And I was accepting, out of 400 people that I saw a year, I was seeing like 12 to 16 that I thought were candidates. And the rest of them were too emotionally upset after having had 5 unsuccessful back operations. And so I began putting needles in and hooking up electricity to them. And that was the beginning of electroacupuncture. And when the Chinese made their first visit to this country a few years later, they came to see me because they knew about my work with it, and they began using electricity on needles about the same time. And then, in 1972, I was invited to go to an acupuncture symposium at Stanford University, 1,200 physicians attending this. And I met the wildest people in the world there. Olga Worrell, the great spiritual healer, Bill and Gladys McGarry, who had a clinic in Arizona that was based on the Edgar Cayce work, Felix Mann, who was a wonderful acupuncturist from England. And Bill McGarry said, well, there's another surgeon who thinks like you. You ought to meet him. And I called Bob Brewer, and he was having a meeting in Virginia Beach that fall. Well, you talk about blowing your mind. It was what Andrea Puharich calls the rupturing of the mental hymen. They did, I'm a neurosurgeon. I'm pretty straight up until that time. And all of a sudden, I hear about colonics. I'm a surgeon. Colonics. And other such things, biofeedback and autogenic training and past life therapy. And I had my first past life therapy session And suddenly, for 2 hours, I was out of the world in another space. And that night, Joel Andrews, a trance medium harpist, was doing a concert. And suddenly, I'm out of my body, floating above 200 people who are listening to the concert, and I'm looking down at them and wondering what's going on. And that was really sort of the beginning of odd events in my life. And then I met Carolyn. No, that's not quite true. The following, in December, I met the first, quote, psychic that I had known, Henry Rucker. And I went up to see Henry in Chicago. I was in La Crosse. And I walked in, and he says, "I've been waiting 10 years for you. My teacher told me you would come." And Henry knew more about me than I did. And so Henry became a pastoral counselor at my clinic at St. Francis Hospital in La Crosse. And all of a sudden, I'm out on a twig as far as you can go. I had a grant for $50,000 from a Fortune 500 company, as long as I never mentioned their name publicly, to study, quote, psychic diagnosis, because that's what we called it in those days. I had a ball. I visited 75 just common, if you will, street psychics. They had no experience, but evaluating their ability to make a diagnosis without knowing anything about the patient except a name, a birthday, or something like that. The average such person with no training was 5 times better than chance, and 5 of them were 7 times better than chance. That's highly statistically significant. So that was the beginning of my work in what later, when Carol and I began working together, we call medical intuition. Do you want me to go any further?
Well, we met in 1984. And I went to, there was one of the people that Norm mentioned was a marvelous gentleman, a brilliant researcher. The world would have been very different without him. The great Elmer Green, who created biofeedback, among other wonderful contributions. I'm sure you've heard of biofeedback. Anyway, Elmer also started a meeting place called Council Grove, which gathered scientists, astronomers, astrologers, medicine men, real ones, NASA scientists, just an entire configuration of researchers into the parallel universe we live in, every year, a week after Easter. And we would gather in a place called Council Grove, Kansas, which was the grove where the Native American tribes held council. We would meet at this place that was a summer camp for kids, essentially, and sleep on bunk beds. And nobody was allowed cameras or anything because secrets were exchanged. And that's where I met Norm. And I was invited there by a NASA scientist. And I'd met him at this crazy place I'd gone where people learned to go out of their body, the Monroe Institute in Virginia. So a crazy track led me there. So I go there, but I really was invited as a publisher. And nobody there knew that I was a baby medical intuitive. So I met this wonderful woman named Pat Norris, who was Elmer's daughter, and she said, you should talk to that doctor over there. He studies people who are medically intuitive, and there's Norm sitting at a table like this with glasses like this. And he's peeling an apple. And I said, Dr. Shealy, could I talk to you? Yeah. I sat down and I said, I think I'm one of those people who's who's medically intuitive. And he said, how good are you? And I said, I don't know. I don't know. And he said, well, can you see people who are sick? Can you diagnose illness? Can you do this? I said, I don't know. And he says, I don't need anybody to tell me someone's energy's off. I can see that. And I said, I don't know. And he says, well, then I'll call you sometime. I'll call you sometime. Okay, do that. So I, that week what was over, and I go back to New Hampshire, and Norm goes back to Springfield. He'd moved to Springfield, Missouri by then. And he called, and the first reading, I remember I was in the office of the publishing company. It was Dr. Shealy. And I remember sitting up in my chair, Dr. Shealy. And isn't it funny when someone important calls you, you sit up in your chair? They don't know you're sitting up in your chair, but there you are sitting up in your chair. And he told me he had a patient in his office, and what information did I need? And I said, I don't know, because I'd never done this before, and so he gave me a name and an age. Now, that's important because I'm not an astrologer, so I didn't get birth date, time, but age. And I've never asked for a birth date, time in all my career, because I don't need that data, but even if I got it, it would be useless for me, as I'm not an astrologer. And then what happened was, impressions, slowly started to come in. They started to come in of this first patient. And the esophagus, I did not know anatomy. I still don't know anatomy, but at least now I can speak the body a little bit. But I spoke more in metaphor, right? That first reading, I said the esophagus was like concrete. But I could image it very clearly. And so for me, it was the first time I'd done anything, what you'd think of as long distance. I since now, years later. And we'll explain this to you as we go through the weekend. There's no distance but in that world. There is no time, there is no space. Data, energy, any more than you can send an energy mail in a second. It does not operate on geography, distance, time, or space, which is why it goes like this, it goes like this, it goes like this. It's the exact same principle. I get the data exactly that fast through the same wires as the internet operates. So if you understand that it is the psychic internet system, and that's all there's to it, and that is the best way to understand it. It's a psychic internet, and that's all there's to it. And I connect to your computer database, and files are sent to me. Done. So that began our work together. And it didn't take very long for the phone calls on patients to increase to quite a few a day, sometimes 3 to 4 a day. And it just became normal, a normal part of our life to do readings sometimes every day during the week. It was normal. It just became normal. For me, that normalcy, I think one of the reasons why I became good, I think there's several reasons why I became as good as I became. One is I never married. And I offer that as one of the reasons because I was not distracted. I have lived an undistracted life. And so I have only been devoted to my work. It's not that I chose it that way, it simply ended up that way. And so I have only been focused on what was given to me to focus on. Secondly, I'm obsessed with what I'm focused on. Third, I think my wiring was properly put in place before this opened up, like a scaffolding. And specifically, that wiring was that I was Catholic. Now, the role that played for me, not for everybody, I'm now talking about my personal journey, my personal, and that it served me very strongly in that, and the way in which I was educated, which was in Catholic schools, and then specifically, very, very tightly. I am not a traumatized Catholic. In fact, I'm a very spoiled one, in that I am not traumatized. And in fact, I am somebody who was smart enough, clever enough to separate from the politics and go for the jewels, which was the mystical tradition. I ate it up because I knew there had to be some truth in there somewhere. Just as I go for the truth in a human being, and who cares what a person's packaged in? There's no difference. It would be like throwing out the packaging of a human being because you don't like the way they look. Only a fool does something so superficial. And in every religion, there are jewels. I don't care about the package it comes in any more than I care about the package you come in. That's a fool's way of looking at something. I don't like the way it's packaged. Well, then go away. I don't like the way you're packaged. How would you like that? So for me, the way Catholicism is packaged is irrelevant. Its jewels were perfect for me. The tradition of mysticism and the tradition of miracles, the tradition of apparitions, the tradition of devotion and prayer, somehow or other, brought me into the inner world with such reality from the time I was a child that the inner world was more real for me than the outer world, and it has always been that way. It has been more difficult for me to come out of my inner world and look around than come in. And in fact, when I first sat with my spiritual director, as a woman in her late 40s, I said, "You've got to help me get out, not get in. I can't seem to get out. The outside world is not real to me, and it has never been real to me, and I don't know how to get out." And I said to him, before I die, I need to make the outside world real just once, because it's not. It's the inside that makes more sense to me. So for me, the inside world has always been my negotiating place, my compass. So for me to do a reading is more natural for me than dancing on a dance floor, which is completely unnatural for me. Anything physical is unnatural. Directions on the physical world, this kind of thing, very unnatural. But you ask me to go this way and up, to read archetypes, to go this way, is as easy as drinking a glass of water. Because this world, I was born wired to. The world to understand the nature of saints, to understand how the mystical laws work, to understand the reality of this world is very simple. This isn't, to me, it is the order of the universe, period. The natural order. So when it came to doing readings, it was actually simply organizing an inner alphabet. It was organizing, plugging me in with Norm to an internet system I was born wired to. And what my background as a Catholic was it was the only religion that provided me with a mystical counterpart that made sense of an ability I had, and it was a marriage of forces. And then I added Buddhism and I was complete. And then I studied the rest of it to grab other mystical traditions, and I was on my way, which is where we're going to go. So, and then through the years, the interior just continued to expand and expand and expand and expand. So I couldn't have done any of this if I had not met Norm. And I've said that whether or not Norm was sitting next to me on a stage, because there are many, many things about that. One is that when we first started out, I never wanted to be a medical intuitive. I had no interest in that as a career at all because I never heard of it. So how can one have an ambition for something one never heard of? I wanted to be a fiction author, but I have no talent for it. I have a genius for something I have no interest in. So, heaven gets you, right? But Norm was a shield for me, a protection, a shield, but also gradually a science medical counterpart. Whereas other medical intuitives did not have the blessing of partnering with a physician for the long haul. They did not form that kind of partnership. We're the only ones in the world who have ever done that. Ever in the world. Secondly, because we're the only ones who have ever done that, we've produced work and research. So we will probably go down in history as that. We've contributed to medicine, energy anatomy, and an understanding of how the energetic anatomical system is a reflection and in harmony with physical anatomy. Norm's whole bank account of energy research on the human energy system is the seminal work in energy medicine. So I'll let him, not let him, but that's his contribution. And to be honest with you, just being able to hear a lecture from him is something you'll remember the rest of your life. I think working with him was a protective field because when we started out, there was a very aggressive attitude between the holistic field and allopathic medicine. Now we never, and I represented the, if you will, the alternative fringe, and yet because of my education and my love of scholarship, and because I was not radical, I did not go into this field with an aggressive, radical attitude that said, I'll show that allopathic world, and I was never aggressive about allopathic medicine. Our work was not to prove that we could heal cancer or any illness by going on the opposite direction. Rather, our work was how to combine, how to be the wisest path using what we could learn about the human nature, the human spirit, allopathic, traditional, what's the whole picture? What's the whole picture? And further, there were many, many times as we worked together that I was learning my own craft. I had to learn my own craft. And the help of a physician was, I could never have learned it without Norm, because through the years, I would so often, have to say, well, I'm not sure about this, but we were learning what I know will become a science in the future. But there are many parts of this science that I think we're not ready for. One of which is, there were times in the diagnosis of somebody when I would say an illness is coming in. Now, I could tell Norm that, and he had the patient in the room. So what I would share with Norm, he would filter before he told the patient. And I'd say, this patient's going to get this illness in 2 months unless da-da-da-da-da-da-da.
Can I tell them?
Yeah, jump in, absolutely.
Well, we've had a lot of very interesting exchanges of that kind. I had a man who was very depressed. That's all I've seen for the last 40 years is highly depressed people. I mean, basically, you know, when you've had 5, 7, 52 unsuccessful operations, how could you not be depressed? And at any rate, I couldn't get through to him. And so we called Carolyn. He's sitting there, his wife is beside him, and Carolyn says, if he doesn't come out of his funk, he'll be dead in August of cancer. And if he doesn't, he's going to die. And so I shake him and yell at him and tell him it's time to get his act together. And so August came, and he had a pulmonary embolus, a little blood clot to the lung, but he survived it. Another years go by. On August 31st of the next year, he died. So she didn't tell me what August. She just said it's
Sometimes that's not clear.
Yeah. But in general, Carolyn is only at her best 93% accurate.
I said one time, what was it, the dentist with pancreatic cancer one time?
Oh, yes, John. This was a lovely young man who had a thing with his father, and we don't need to go into all those details, but she said she saw cancer. We couldn't find it. I agreed that he probably had cancer, but there were no tests that would come up. And 3 months later, he came back and had cancer of the pancreas, and still wouldn't come to grips with a problem which he hated his father. And he didn't even want to let his father know he was dying. And I insisted at least do that, because I knew the father also. And John went out, not quite hating his father so badly, but he was never able to come to grips with his intense belief that his father had sexually violated his children. And so, you know, but that's the kind of thing that Carol did. But my favorite, I think, is the woman who she had lost her gag reflex. And, you know, no gag response at all. She had diabetes, so we assumed it's diabetic neuropathy. So I called Carol, and this was the first time she told me about a past life in relation. She said, well, I saw her on a ship a long time ago, and a beam broke loose, and something hit her in the neck and killed her. So I didn't tell the woman what Carla said. I did a past life regression on her, and she saw herself in, you know, several hundred years ago being captured by pirates, and she's in the bottom of the ship, and a beam breaks loose as the ship is sinking and strikes her across the throat. Now, after that, then, she told me that her problem was that she thought her husband had been sexually violating their 2 boys. And so she divorced her husband, and her gag response returned. Her diabetic neuropathy disappeared overnight as she got well. And that was largely because of the sequence of Carolyn seeing her in a previous life dying of that. Personally, my own belief is that you cannot have a major, significant illness that's not related to a past life.
When did you develop that?
Oh, 30 years ago.
So one time, the past life, as I say, This kind of unfolded. I mean, the past life readings didn't start right off the bat. This gradually, I mean, my readings started off just picking up what was wrong with you, and eventually it's grew to be why, and eventually that opened up to more and more depth of events in your life, and then eventually it's like a spiral that just more and more data as I could comprehend the significance of that data. It was never, and then we would discuss that. I mean, it took years and years to be able to do this and do it well. Years. So when that first past life, just like the first time I got an archetype, and then the first time, it was as if and then I would say, okay, I can handle this, and then boom, it started to come. But with past lives, I remember one time, Norm loves to do past life. He'll do that with you. And I would think, oh no. You know, in workshops, I thought, oh no, he's going to do a past life. And we were in Holland, and this was a life-changing thing for us, this one trip to Holland, for a couple of reasons. And one of which is our trip to Spain in between 2 weekends. But he did a past life regression in a workshop in the evening, and I had already taught, and I was very, very tired. And I thought, this past life stuff, so I'm sitting in the back of the room, and I'm so tired, and I'm drifting. And he starts the past life directing the class. And all of a sudden, some part of me is following his instruction, and I can't get out. And I'm thinking, what the heck? And he says, now, just let yourself drift back. And I'm thinking, wake up. And I can't. And now I'm drifting, and I can't believe that I am I'm me, but I'm locked into this past life thing. And he says, now, where are you? And I'm like, where am I? And I look, and I'm in France during the time of the Musketeers, like 1730, 40, 50. And I'm a sloppy, dirty, fat, greasy man. And I'm standing there in one of those, like a musketeer kind of, and I look, and I'm me looking at this, and I said, this can't be me. I am such a clean neck. I'm phobic. I've got, I'm practically OCD, And I said, this can't be me. Get me out of this body. I was just cringing, but I was in it. So Norm says, look around you, where are you? And I could feel myself in this fat, dirty, greasy body looking around this room ugh! And the room is dirty too. That's all I could think of was I need room service. I mean, I need to clean this place because I'm not staying here. It was like me in my phobia about cleanliness screaming 2 centuries ago. So then Norm says, okay, now it's late. You have to go to bed. And I feel this being turned, and it was me. And it had to go to bed. So it goes up the stairs, and my modern me, is watching this creature, me, walk up the stairs, and I can't get out. And part of me screaming, wake up! This is torture! And I can't get up. And this being gets up, and honestly, because I know enough about history is like the love of my life, I see this straw bed with a homespun on it, which is exactly what it would have been like. And this was probably full of bugs. And it was. It was. And so Norm says, okay, get ready for bed. And this big creature that was me simply dropped its drawers, and this its blouse just fell filthy, and it got into bed. It didn't wash nothing. So now it's lying in bed, and it said, and then Norm says, see if there's anyone next to you. So I look over, and there was this toothless gray creature woman next to me. And I thought, if she touches me, I will kill her. I will. I will kill her. I will end her life. And I don't care if this is 2.5 centuries ago. You are so dead. And I'm laying there in this, and I can't get out. And I thought, get me. And you know, I adore. Then I thought, if you don't get me out of this, Norm, if you don't get me out of this torturous past life. And so finally Norm says, wake up, it's morning. And I'm like, ugh. And I had to get this thing up. And he says, come back. And I was like, boom. And I'm telling you, the first, second, third time, the very first time I went to France, it was, I was in a filthy place. It was just, and it took a few years for me to kind of get my head on straight, to go back there, because my whole association with it was, that is the dirtiest place I have ever been. I mean, it is like dirty, dirty, dirty. When someone talks about India, I thought it's nothing compared to France. But, I mean, and now, you know, I adore France. I go there all the time, and I've just kind of like unpasted lifed. But I have to say that, I mean, it was totally an unremarkable life, except that it probably made me like clean phobic. And it was really quite something. The past, I mean, really quite something. Anyway, it's powerful.
Well,
Don't do it again.
I want to point out, what does all this have to do with mysticism? To me, experiences like this are the beginning. This is what we would call the foothills of mysticism. It is the beginning of entrance into that dimension between what some of us think is reality here and another dimension which is far more mysterious and larger than any of us. And so it's connections like this with our past lives that, to me, are the driving force in our individual lives today. I think there is a purpose, as Carolyn said at the very beginning. Certain people you meet are bound, it's a karmic relationship that is either to restore friendships and move on, or to hopefully undo past very unpleasant things, or at least get them out of your life for many lifetimes. And so it all is related to the whole concept of what is the difference between the physical, the mental, the emotional, the spiritual, and the divine.
And I will say that the more and the longer that I have been in this, my journey has taken me from understanding the role stress, organic stress, life stress plays, to then appreciating the role of psychological, more deeply emotional. But then I came home to the role of the deepening journey of mysticism. And still it continued to evolve. Because, I mean, that all said and done, I mean, even the most recent piece that I've had to factor in, that has once again reshifted the alchemical portrait of how I understand healing and suffering. And perhaps the requirements of healing or the necessary parts. And how I factor in is the way in which things come to me. Because I live in a world where I have grown accustomed to mystical mail. And that's the only way I can put it, you know. And I'll talk about that, but of the role Padre Pio has recently begun to play in my life. And I had no interest in Padre Pio other than as yet another mystic. And yet, the way in which he has made entry into my life has made him stand out, because the entry has been what I would call an announcement. Pay attention, because of all the particulars. And what has really stood out for me was something I did not know about Pio, which was that he, for all of his many, many gifts, many. For example, he had what's called the gift of tongues. Pio spoke every single language in the world. Every single one. When he was hearing confession, which is what he called his charism, he believed he was born to hear confession. No matter who, what language is spoken to him while he was in confession, he was fluent in that language. Now that is called the gift of tongues, not this mumbling idiocy that fundamentalists do. But this is the gift of tongues. But Pio saw his calling as hearing confession. Now, I never added the dimension, the mystical factor of the need to confess, the need to, I need to get this out of me. Therapy is not sufficient as a healing tool. It's just not. And it never will be. It's insufficient. It is insufficient. It cannot go the distance. Therapy suits the ego. Confession heals the soul. And that's all there's to it. And when one has serious wounds, when one has consciously wounded another human being, therapy will not get you out. And when your physical suffering that you have lodged in your body, when you are festering in your physical body because you have done something festering in your life that is festering, then you have to really humble yourself in front of the universe and say, I have sinned. I have consciously violated life, and I chose to do it. I have consciously violated the laws of life, and I must be forgiven by the laws of life. I now get that. I get that. And it is not a Catholic thing. It is a human thing. The laws of life call for that kind of reconciliation. And I do not think people can heal unless that is put in place. I do not believe that. Today, I will say, unless that is understood, unless that is on the table and say, is there something you need to let go of? Is there a demon in you that needs to come out? You're never going to heal. Then we'll deal with that. So as I say, part of this journey, for anyone to say that for me personally, I'm speaking for me, I continue to learn. But I feel like I'm truly, as I grasp the nature of the soul, the needs of the soul for healing are very different than the needs of the body, than the needs of the psyche, Each has its own needs. And what I have come to understand about the human being is that human beings have their stopping point. Some human beings can say, I can take what my soul needs to heal. Others put the stopgap up and say, I can't go that deep. I'm sorry, this is as far as I can go. I can't do soul healing. I can only do ego because I just can't own. I'm too proud to confess. I'm too proud. I can only go into therapy where I can angle the story so it's their fault and not mine. I've got to stay in the narrative and keep bitching about what happened to me. Because that feels like healing, smells like it, looks like it, tastes like it, but it's not. And so long as you stay there, what it's like is like going every week to get the blister lanced, but you never go deeper to stop the reason why you get blisters. You never get the poison out of your system. You simply go weekly for therapy to lance your blisters. So this is why I say I continually learn now what the soul needs to heal. So I almost want to ask people, how deep do you want to go? And the other thing is, I no longer like to do readings for people. I will help them do readings for themselves. And the reason is because automatically you become children. And it's like, tell me. And you automatically fall into amazement. You fall under my spell and you fall into enchantment. And what I have come to understand is that most people do not know how to handle a reading. And what I mean by that is, and I just did this on my radio show. I do a weekly radio show with Hay House. Maybe some of you have heard it, but a woman called this past Tuesday. She wanted a reading, and I said to her, I will not give you that. And the reason is this. When I said, you know that you have called and asked me for a reading, which tells you know you need one. If your own intuition is telling you need a reading, then it's telling you something's wrong. So right there, you know you need help. I said, now you are seeking my help in hopes that you hear everything's okay. And I said, and if I were to tell you that, then what you would do is you would hold on to that as an excuse not to go to the doctor. I said, and further, you would hold on to that as an excuse not to go to the doctor for the next 5 years, for 5 years. You would say, but Carolyn said I was okay. And when you find out 5 years from now that you're not, it'll be my fault. I said, I will not give you the opportunity to blame me for your irresponsible choice. I said, you need to go to the doctor because your own system is telling you that. I will not become your scapegoat. Because what people do not understand is that your health can change in the blink of an eye. A reading today is only valuable until you change your stress level. And it can change in the blink of an eye. You can be healed through the night as you sleep, or in the morning wake up fully malignant. The person that I read with cancer, I told Norm, this man has pancreatic cancer. He did not have cancer, and 2 weeks later, full pancreatic cancer. Full. You can become fully malignant in the blink of an eye. Fully malignant in the blink of an eye. Just like you can be fully healed while you sleep. So a reading today is good for this moment. Because in the next 10 minutes, you can turn on the hate in your body and change that reading that fast. And you don't get that, but I do. And unless I'm dealing with someone who got that, I won't do a reading. So don't corner me. I'm here to teach you and to teach you to do that. But do not corner me and ask me because I've just put the screen up here. And now you know why.